Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Iran's nuclear program continues to be a hot topic. Now, the United States, Israel, and their allies fear Iran is using their nuclear program to develop nuclear weapons instead of the nuclear energy Iran claims it's doing. Now, early last year, sanctions imposed on Iran cut them off from SWIFT, the computer hub that processes the world's financial transactions.
President Barack Obama mentioned this week of possibly scaling those sanctions back and giving Iran up to 6 months if they would agree to further monitoring of their nuclear sites. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, initially did not agree with President Obama's softening on Iran, but later he recanted. These reductions in sanctions would only provide a very small amount of relief to a country that has been cut off from buying or selling with much of the world.
Now, Iran is no stranger to sanctions, but sanctions imposed on its financial institutions in the early part of 2012 excluded them from SWIFT. Now, as we mentioned, SWIFT is essentially the computer hub that processes the world's financial transactions, called by some the central nervous system of finance. Now, this move was meant to shut down much of Iran's oil business and put a hand to the throat of the Iranian economy.
That's tough. Headquartered in Brussels, the SWIFT network processes upwards of 80% of the world's cross-border payments. Now, that's more than $6 trillion between banks and business transactions every single day, Jeff. No other country has ever been cut off from SWIFT like Iran has been. And Leonard Schrank, who was the CEO of SWIFT from 1992 to 2007, said, "Throwing somebody off the system is big. That's big. We've never done that before."
Iran was eliminated from the system by deleting their personal codes. Iranian banks and institutions had their unique access codes to SWIFT denied. Now, those same Iranian companies sent and received more than 2 million transactions each year. Leonard Schrank continued, "Every country has a code, and they just delete it. It's like disconnecting somebody from their account on the internet. You can get another one, but at SWIFT, there isn't another one."
As a side note, even before using SWIFT, the sanctions already imposed were affecting its economy. Proof of this could be seen in the value of the Iranian currency dropping 20% in value. And if you were to purchase a basket of groceries in Iran's capital, Tehran, in 2010, it would only been about $73. But in 2012, just 2 years later, that price jumped from $144 for the same basket of groceries.
That's a big increase.
It sure is.
Now, a little more on the sanctions imposed against Iran. No other country has ever had such actions taken against them in this way, literally severing Iran off from the world of commerce. Now, in other words, making it extremely difficult for them, as we said, to do any type of buying or selling.
Well, that puts a real strain on a country's economy.
And that's what they meant to do.
Yes. A little bit more on the history of SWIFT. SWIFT is an acronym for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. It's stationed in Brussels, Belgium, and it was established in 1973, and it is the spinal cord of the global financial system. It's like a financial cooperative overseen by the world's banks. And like we said, it processes over $6 trillion, a huge amount of cash flow worth of transactions between businesses and banks daily. So it plays a huge part in the world's commerce.
Sounds like I see why they call it a hub.
That's right.
Now, in an interview with Leonard Schrank, the former CEO of SWIFT for 15 years, he said, when asked how he thought that this would affect Iran, he said that these sanctions are the last big one. Now, this in regards to the world's efforts to force Iran back to the bargaining table to discuss them putting a halt to their nuclear program. Now, how would they accomplish this? Would be to literally delete the Iranian BIC, or those are those bank identifier codes that we mentioned, right from the system. Cut them right off from the system.
Well, that would exclude some 30 Iranian banks and subsidiaries, including Iran's central bank, which processes most of the country's oil contracts. Now, Schrank said when SWIFT deletes the code, whether for the banks, the central bank, or the entire country, it prevents them from having access to or from the system. They're off the system.
To or from.
To or from it, he said they are completely cut off.
Wow. Now, of course, as we brought out to you before regarding this same issue, such a move like this would cripple Iran's economy because the alternative would be cash and barter only, which is not automated, less secure, and will take a lot longer to establish connection with their counterparts. Now, even though SWIFT's operation is supposed to be outside of politics, SWIFT said the EU sanction imposed against Iran forced SWIFT to take actions complying with the laws of the UN, or the EU, I'm sorry.
The EU, correct. Now, as a result of those sanctions, Iranians are said to be transporting money about 100 miles or so across the Gulf in speedboats, which, we talked about that before, which they had to do because they had no other way to get their finances taken care of, to Dubai, just to continue to do some business and have some type of cash flow coming in.
Wow. Now, as we spring forward a bit to see how those sanctions have affected Iran, you may have noticed that gas prices have been dropping. Now, because of concerns over the possibility of a conflict in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. has been stepping up its own oil production. Now, because of the sanctions imposed on Iran, it's been very difficult for them to sell their oil, which funds about half of the Iranian government.
The IAEA expects that Iran's oil sales to have dropped about 30%. And Mark Dubowitz, a sanctions expert with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, said Iran is for the first time since the Iraq War seeing its oil wealth threatened. Iran has had to resort on bartering to keep its commerce somewhat going, and countries like China, India, and South Korea have set up bank accounts for Iran to do business with them.
Now, the catch is that Iran must spend the money they receive for oil in those countries only for goods and services that they often don't need, and they're unable to transfer the cash home. Now, Dubowitz said these particular Asian countries have Iran over a barrel because they can buy Iranian oil at a significant discount and they're paying in their local currency.
Sounds like they're getting the benefit out of this whole sanctions deal. While Iran's oil minister claimed the discovery of a new oil field, exports are still falling. Now, some reports also say that they're storing oil offshore because they can't sell it. One of the main reasons is insurance. EU sanctions prohibit the insurance of Iranian oil, and that's a problem for people who are actually willing to buy that Iranian oil, and probably at a significant discount, just like China, India, and South Korea. But they can't get anyone to transport that oil from Iran to their countries.
Can't get anyone to ship it.
That's right.
Now, of course, it appears that these sanctions have so far pushed Iran to the bargaining table, and as they agree to appear at the nuclear talks in Baghdad.
Sounds like they're really pushing for peace through force.
That's right.
Well, we know how that ends. Now, we mentioned earlier that President Obama proposed a very modest relief for Iran if they would agree to continued monitoring. Let's listen to what the president had to say and pay attention, close attention, to the time frame of the 6 months, which will be the remaining 6 months, of course, of the original 9 months of this final status agreement that began July 29th of this year, 2013. Take a look at this video.
So that we know exactly what they're doing at all their various facilities, and that would then provide time and space for us to test over a certain period of months whether or not they are prepared to actually resolve this issue to the satisfaction of the international community, making us confident that, in fact, they're not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. In return, the basic structure of what's been talked about, although not completed, is that we would provide very modest relief at the margins of the sanctions that we've set up. But importantly, we would leave in place the core sanctions that are most effective and have most impact on the Iranian economy, specifically oil sanctions and sanctions with respect to banks and financing. And what that gives us is the opportunity to test how serious are they, but it also gives us an assurance that if it turns out 6 months from now that they're not serious, we can dial those sanctions right back up. Gives us an assurance that if it turns out 6 months from now that they're not serious, we can dial those sanctions right back up. 6 months, a certain period of months, 6 months, a certain period of months, 6 months, a certain period of months, 6 months, a certain period of months.
Wow, sounds like everything's fallen right in line with that time frame.
Yep, perfect timeline.
Now, the world just celebrated Veterans Day, and the former soldiers were asked to describe war or their war experience in 6 words. Now, YPN's Larry McGee has our story. Larry, were the soldiers able to do it in 6 words?
They were, and with responses which offered a heart-wrenching view into the injured minds of those smitten by warfare. The effort was headed by Mike Niemeth and Sean Wheelwright, both of whom are graduates of West Point Academy, who worked to compile up to 1,000 of the 6-word sentences from war veterans since June. Hearts and minds. I lost both, read one sentence, posted by the duo who hoped through their efforts to help those damaged by war to begin the process of repairing themselves emotionally. There is tragedy. There is sadness. There are bad memories, said one of the graduates, and it's hard to package it in 6 words. Yet still many tried. Nicotine, caffeine, dead friends, no sleep, read another sentence. Divorce, despair, only God can repair, read still another. Graduate Wheelwright, who lost 14 classmates and spent 15 months on the front lines in Iraq, but was never deployed, himself contributed this one. Never deployed, uncomfortable with thank yous. For graduate Nemeth, who confesses that war is absolute madness, the expression changes daily, but currently his reads, through madness comes clarity and understanding. Hard stories with hard lessons taken from 2 of West Point's finest and hundreds of others driven mad by the sword. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Wow, sounds like a lot of suffering those guys.
It's a lot of misery they describe.
It sure is. Iran and the UN's nuclear chief have reached a deal to allow expanded monitoring of the country's nuclear sites. Yukiya Amano of the IAEA said, "This is an important step forward to start with, but much more needs to be done." Iran says it's a sign of progress toward a border agreement with the U.S. and other world powers on its nuclear program.
Now, Secretary of State John Kerry said the major powers were united on an Iran nuclear deal during the weekend talks in Geneva. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as we mentioned earlier, initially rejected this agreement, but has since softened his criticism on the U.S.-led negotiations. Since allowing the talks, he said, has given more time to extract concessions from Iran. Now, let's take a look at what Secretary Kerry said or had to say to assure Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the end game, and he uses these words, end game, is still the main subject here.
I believe the Prime Minister needs to recognize that no agreement has been reached about the end game here. That's the subject of the negotiation. No agreement has been reached about the end game here. That's the subject of the negotiation. No agreement has been reached about the end game here. That's the subject of the negotiation.
Wow. Sounds like the end game, they're still talking about what's going to take place here at the end of these 6 months.
And it appears that war is still on the horizon. Well, 6 months is not a long time, folks. In fact, Yisrael Hawkins of the House of Yahweh has been preaching and publishing concerning the scriptures and the prophecies that foretell what mankind's end will be. Now, you can order your book, Birth of the Nuclear Baby, Explosion of Sin, when you call in or write the House of Yahweh, and also request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how you can do it.
You can write the House of Yahweh at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. Or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them at either one of their websites. First one is www.yahweh.com or www.yisraelhawkins.com. You can email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls that are outside the United States, you can call the number that's on your screen now.
Well, 6 months is not a long time to prepare. You can do so right now. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins bringing forth the message straight from the inspired Holy Scriptures and showing you what you need to do to save yourself and your family from the soon coming destruction. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.